Every one of these places used to be the destination. The spot people saved up all year to visit, the place celebrities flew in for, the resort with the waiting list. Then, for reasons ranging from war to hurricanes to one man's spectacularly bad business decisions, the music stopped and never started again. So here are these 15 places were world's vacation capitals. Now they're in ruins. Number 15. Wonderland Amusement Park, Beijing, China. In the mid-1990s, the Thailand-based Rainwood Group set out to build what was supposed to become the largest amusement park in Asia, a 120-acre fantasy complex just outside Beijing, complete with its own version of a fairy tale castle, styled unmistakably after Disney's own. The company had deep pockets and big ambitions, already holding the distribution rights to Red Bull in China, and Wonderland was meant to be the crown jewel of its growing portfolio. Then, in 1998, construction simply stopped. Officials cited complications with local land policy after major flooding that year changed how forested land could legally be developed, and negotiations with local officials and landowners fell apart before a single ride was ever installed. What remained was an empty concrete castle shell rising out of the countryside, eventually surrounded by cornfields planted by local farmers who'd simply started using the abandoned land, with the eerie skeleton of Cinderella's castle looming over their crops for the next 15 years. A 2008 attempt to revive construction also failed, and the site was finally demolished in 2013, replaced eventually by an outlet shopping mall. Wonderland never got the chance to become anyone's vacation capital, but for over a decade, it stood as one of the most photographed, unfinished ruins in the world. Proof that even a Disney knockoff can become a genuinely haunting monument to a dream that simply ran out of money. Number 14. Six Flags New Orleans, Louisiana. Originally opened in 2000 under the name Jazzland, this 227-acre amusement park along the eastern edge of New Orleans went bankrupt after just 2 seasons before Six Flags bought it out of bankruptcy in 2002 and signed an ambitious 75-year lease with the city. For a few years, it functioned as a legitimate regional attraction, drawing families in for roller coasters and water rides in the Louisiana heat. That all ended on August 29, 2005, when Hurricane Katrina made landfall and the city's levees failed catastrophically. The park sat under roughly 12 feet of floodwater for weeks, and Six Flags declared the entire property a total loss, eventually terminating its lease during a separate bankruptcy filing of its own in 2009. A sign near the entrance kept reading, "Closed for storm," for years afterward, a strange, almost accidental piece of gallows humor for a park that everyone quietly understood was never coming back. For nearly 2 decades, the rusting roller coasters and flooded concession stands became one of the most photographed symbols of Katrina's lingering damage, hosting alligators, wild boars, and the occasional Hollywood film crew, since the abandoned park doubled as a filming location for movies including Jurassic World. Demolition of the site finally began in 2024, nearly 20 years after the storm, with plans for a mixed-use development to eventually replace what's left of the rides. Several proposals to revive the site came and went over the years, including plans for a new amusement park, an outlet mall, and a water park, none of which ever secured enough funding to move forward. By the time a theme park company finally pledged real money toward redevelopment in 2016, engineers determined that the original buildings and ride structures had deteriorated too badly to salvage, meaning whatever eventually replaces Six Flags, New Orleans will have to be built essentially from scratch on land that spent nearly 20 years as one giant, slowly rusting memorial to a single storm. Number 13. Boblo Island, Ontario, and Michigan. Boblo Island sits in the Detroit River, technically on the Canadian side of the border, though for nearly a century it functioned as Detroit's own personal seaside escape, minus the sea. Starting in 1898, the Detroit, Windsor, and Belle Isle Ferry Company built an amusement park there, ferrying visitors across on 2 steamships, the SS Columbia and the SS St. Clair, each capable of carrying around 2,500 passengers at a time on the roughly 18-mile trip downriver. At its peak, Boblo featured roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, a zoo, and a dance hall financed by Henry Ford that could reportedly hold 5,000 dancers at once. The island also has a genuinely significant civil rights history, since a 1945 Michigan Supreme Court ruling stemming from a black college student named Sarah Elizabeth Ray being denied passage on a Boblo ferry helped establish a legal precedent against racial discrimination in interstate travel. But by the early 1990s, the aging boats and mounting maintenance costs made the whole operation unsustainable, and the ferries stopped running in 1991, with the park itself closing for good on September 30th, 1993. The rides were auctioned off and scattered to other amusement parks around the country, and the island sat mostly abandoned and slowly decaying for years, its overgrown pathways and empty pavilions a favorite subject for urban explorers. Eventually, developers began clearing what remained to build private homes, and today, Boblo functions as a small, exclusive residential community, though a few crumbling remnants of the old park still poke out from between the newer houses. Number 12. Salton Sea Resort Towns, California. In the 1950s, developers looked at California's Salton Sea, an accidental inland lake created decades earlier by a Colorado River irrigation mishap, and saw a genuine gold mine. They built out entire resort communities along its shores: Salton City, Bombay Beach, Salton Sea Beach, and Desert Shores, marketing the whole stretch as the Salton Riviera and promising a miracle in the desert. At its peak, the sea drew more visitors annually than Yosemite National Park, hosting celebrities including Frank Sinatra and members of the Rat Pack, who performed and vacationed along its shoreline. The problem was the sea itself. With no natural outlet, the Salton Sea has no way to flush out agricultural runoff, and by the 1970s, rising salinity and pesticide contamination were killing off fish populations en masse. Hurricane Kathleen struck in 1976, followed by another destructive storm the next year, flooding and permanently damaging huge sections of the shoreline communities that developers never had the money to repair. Today, towns like Bombay Beach sit in a strange limbo between abandoned ghost town and outsider art destination, with a small population of holdouts and snowbirds living among decaying bungalows, rusted trailers, and dollar bills plastered floor to ceiling on the walls of the town's one remaining bar. As one longtime visitor once put it, describing the smell and sight of the place, it's simultaneously strange, repulsive, and beautiful all at once, which is about as accurate a summary of the Salton Sea as anyone's managed to write. Number 11. Nara Dreamland, Japan. When Disneyland opened in Anaheim in 1955, Japanese businessman Kunizo Matsuo flew out to see it, came home thoroughly inspired, and began working directly with Walt Disney's team to build a licensed version in Japan. Licensing negotiations eventually collapsed, so Matsuo built the park anyway, opening Nara Dreamland in 1961 with his own Main Street USA, his own Matterhorn, and his own fairy tale castle. None of it officially connected to Disney, all of it unmistakably inspired by it. For a couple of decades, Nara Dreamland thrived as a genuinely popular regional attraction. That changed once real, officially licensed competition arrived, first with Tokyo Disneyland in 1983, then more devastatingly with the openings of Universal Studios Japan and Tokyo Disney Sea in 2001, both of which siphoned off visitors faster than Nara Dreamland could compete. Annual attendance eventually collapsed to around 400,000 people, and the park finally closed for good on August 31st, 2006. What happened next made Nara Dreamland genuinely famous among urban explorers worldwide. Almost nothing. The park was simply locked up and left exactly as it was. Ticket booths, roller coaster cars, restaurant chairs and all, sitting untouched for the next decade while strict zoning laws blocked any redevelopment. It wasn't until 2016 that demolition finally began, wrapping up in December 2017, closing out one of the eeriest, most completely preserved abandoned theme parks anywhere on Earth. Number 10. Spree Park, Berlin, Germany. Spree Park opened in 1969 as the Kulturpark Plenterwald, East Germany's only permanent amusement park, drawing up to 1.7 million visitors a year to its 130-foot Ferris wheel and modest collection of rides along the Spree River. After German reunification, new owners Norbert and Pia Witte took over, rebranded it Spree Park, and poured money into new attractions hoping to compete with flashier Western theme parks. It didn't work. Rising ticket prices, limited parking, and mounting debt sank the park by 2001, and that's where the story takes a genuinely bizarre turn. In January 2002, Norbert Witte fled to Lima, Peru with his family, shipping 6 of the park's rides overseas under the pretense of getting them repaired. When his attempt to build a new park in Peru also collapsed, Witte turned to smuggling cocaine hidden inside one of the old Spree Park rides, a flying carpet attraction that customs agents eventually found stuffed with 167 kilograms of drugs. He served 4 years in a German prison. Meanwhile, back in Berlin, the abandoned park sat quietly decaying for over a decade, its rusted Ferris wheel and moss-covered log flume becoming a favorite backdrop for photographers and urban explorers willing to jump the fence. Since 2016, the nonprofit Grün Berlin has been slowly redeveloping the site into a public art park, restoring the Ferris wheel and a handful of the old dinosaur statues that once stood guard over the rides, though most of Spree Park's original attractions are simply gone for good. Number 9. Concord Resort Hotel, Catskills, New York. For decades, the Concord Resort Hotel in Kiamesha Lake, New York billed itself, without much exaggeration, as the largest resort in the world, with over 1,500 guest rooms, a dining room that sat 3,000 people at once, 3 golf courses, and enough amenities to keep a family entertained for a full week without ever leaving the property. It anchored the Catskills' famous Borscht Belt, the string of Jewish-owned resorts that served as a summer refuge for New York City families for much of the 20th century. The Concord managed to outlast most of its Borscht Belt competitors, largely because it kept reinvesting in new attractions long after other resorts had given up. But cheap air travel eventually made places like Disney World and the Caribbean more appealing than the Catskills, and by the 1990s, the Concord was hemorrhaging money it couldn't recover. It filed for bankruptcy in 1997 and closed its doors permanently on November 3, 1998, laying off more than 400 employees in the process. The main hotel buildings were demolished in stages through the 2000s, and today the site is home to Resorts World Catskills, a large casino and hotel complex built directly on the footprint of the old resort. A small historical marker now sits on the property, acknowledging what used to stand there. A fairly modest tribute to a place that once genuinely called itself the world's foremost resort hotel. Number 8. Grossinger's Catskill Resort Hotel, New York. Grossinger's started as a small Catskills farmhouse in 1914, run by Austrian immigrants who quickly earned a local reputation for their cooking, and it eventually grew, under the leadership of hostess Jenny Grossinger, into one of the most famous resorts in America. At its height, Grossinger's covered more than 1,000 acres and included its own airstrip, post office, and zip code, drawing celebrities like Lucille Ball, Elizabeth Taylor, and Milton Berle, and becoming, in 1952, the first resort anywhere to use artificial snow on its ski slopes. Grossinger's is also widely cited as the direct inspiration for the fictional Kellerman's Resort in the 1987 film Dirty Dancing, since screenwriter Eleanor Bergstein spent much of her childhood vacationing there. The irony is that Grossinger's closed its doors in 1986, a full year before the movie that immortalized its atmosphere ever hit theaters, sold off by the Grossinger family for $9 million to a company that never managed to make the resort profitable again. For more than 3 decades afterward, the abandoned resort slowly crumbled, its indoor pool overtaken by weeds and its offices still stacked with paperwork dated to the Reagan administration. The main buildings were finally demolished in 2018, and in a strange coda, one of the last remaining structures, believed to be the former home of Jenny Grossinger's daughter, burned down in a 2022 fire, closing out the final visible chapter of a resort once considered the Queen of the Catskills. Number 7. Sanji UFO Houses, Taiwan. Starting in 1978, a Taiwanese company began building a genuinely futuristic vacation resort along the northern coast near Tamsui, using a design called the Futuro House, a prefabricated, elevated pod shaped unmistakably like a flying saucer. The plan was to market the resort primarily to American military officers stationed in East Asia, offering a strange, space-age alternative to a typical beach vacation. Construction ran into trouble almost immediately, with several fatal car accidents occurring on site, incidents that local superstition quickly attributed to the demolition of a ceremonial dragon statue that had stood at the resort's entrance. Combined with genuine financial losses following Taiwan's early 1980s economic downturn, the project was abandoned in 1980, only partially finished, and left to sit exactly as it was for the next several decades. A brief attempt to revive the resort in 1989 collapsed within a year, and the pods, by then a strange, rusting tourist attraction in their own right, developed a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in Taiwan. Despite a public petition asking the government to preserve at least one of the structures as a museum, officials ultimately ordered the entire site dismantled in 2007, citing safety concerns, and by 2010, every last pod had been demolished. Number 6. Haludovo Palace Hotel, Kajak, Croatia. In 1969, Communist Yugoslavia set out to build a luxury resort hotel on the island of Krk, specifically to attract wealthy Western tourists, and the project caught the attention of an unlikely investor, Bob Guccione, founder of Penthouse magazine. Guccione poured $45 million into the venture, and when the Haludovo Palace Hotel officially opened in 1972, it came with its own casino, the Penthouse Adriatic Club, staffed by dozens of hostesses flown in specifically for the occasion. The casino was meant to be Guccione's foothold in Eastern Europe, a symbolic bridge between the West and the Soviet bloc. Financially, it was a disaster, going bankrupt and closing within a single year in 1973, and Guccione never recovered the payments he'd been promised from the Yugoslav company that technically owned the property. The Haludovo Hotel itself limped along as a regular resort for almost 2 more decades, hosting a genuinely eclectic guest list that reportedly included Saddam Hussein at one point, until the outbreak of the Croatian War of Independence in 1991 finally shut it down for good. The hotel has sat abandoned ever since, its swimming pools drained, its rooms stripped and graffitied, drawing a steady trickle of urban explorers curious to see what's left of what was once advertised as a complete island paradise. It remains, by most accounts, one of the strangest footnotes in Cold War tourism history. A penthouse-funded casino, built for Tito, abandoned in a war, and left to crumble by the Adriatic Sea ever since. Number 5. Consono, Italy. Until the early 1960s, Consono was an unremarkable farming village in the hills near Lecco, in Italy's Lombardy region, home to a few hundred residents and reachable mainly by mule. In 1962, a wealthy businessman named Count Mario Bagno bought the entire village, evicted its residents, and bulldozed nearly the whole thing to the ground, intent on building what he envisioned as an Italian version of Las Vegas. What replaced the old village was genuinely bizarre. A minaret, a pagoda, a grand hotel and casino, a small zoo, and a sightseeing train. All crammed into one hilltop settlement locals started calling the City of Toys. For about 8 years, the gamble actually worked, drawing partygoers up from Milan for a taste of gambling and nightlife in the countryside. Then, in October 1976, a major landslide destroyed the only road connecting Consono to the outside world, and despite Bagno's efforts to rebuild, the isolation proved fatal to the town's tourist appeal. Consono never recovered. Bagno tried, unsuccessfully, to pivot the property into a retirement home before his death in 1995, and the site was fully abandoned by 2007. Today, the crumbling minaret and graffiti-covered casino floors sit quietly reclaimed by weeds and cherry blossoms, a surreal little monument to one man's Las Vegas dream that a single landslide managed to bury for good. Number 4. Kupari, Croatia. Kupari sits along a small bay just south of Dubrovnik, and its resort history dates back to 1919, when a Czech investor built the first hotel along its coastline, while Croatia was still part of the newly formed Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Decades later, the site expanded dramatically when the Yugoslav People's Army built 5 large hotels there, specifically for military officers and their families, with President Josip Broz Tito himself keeping a private villa nearby for added exclusivity. The complex could accommodate roughly 2,000 guests at a time, and by the 1980s, it had opened to foreign tourists as well, becoming a genuinely popular Adriatic destination. That all ended abruptly in 1991, when the Croatian War of Independence broke out, and the Yugoslav military bombarded the region during the siege of Dubrovnik. Kupari's hotels were shelled repeatedly, and once Yugoslav forces finally withdrew, they stripped the buildings of anything valuable and torched several interiors with phosphorus bombs on their way out. The 5 hotels have sat in ruins along the bay ever since, their war-scarred facades overlooking a beach that, oddly enough, still functions as a peaceful local swimming spot. Redevelopment plans have surfaced periodically over the years, and demolition of one of the most damaged hotels finally began in 2025. But for more than 3 decades, Kupari has remained a genuinely rare site, a former military vacation paradise, left standing exactly as the war left it. Number 3. Prora, Rügen Island, Germany. In 1936, Adolf Hitler's government began construction on what propaganda films proudly dubbed the seaside resort of the 20,000, a colossal vacation complex along the Baltic coast of Rügen Island, designed to hold 20,000 working-class German vacationers at once, every single one of the planned 10,000 rooms offering a view of the sea. The project was part of the Nazi Strength Through Joy program, meant to reward loyal party members with affordable beach holidays while quietly reinforcing their devotion to the regime. Prora was, by design, meant to be the first of 5 identical mega-resorts planned across Germany. It was also never finished. When World War II broke out in 1939, construction materials and labor were diverted entirely to the war effort, and the massive, half-built complex sat essentially empty for the rest of the conflict, briefly sheltering refugees from the bombing of Hamburg before the war ended. Not a single vacationer ever got the beach holiday it was built to provide. After the war, Soviet and then East German forces used parts of the complex sporadically, but by the 1990s, it stood almost entirely abandoned, a nearly 3-mile stretch of blocky, prison-like buildings that became, by most measures, the second largest surviving architectural remnant of the Third Reich after Albert Speer's rally grounds in Nuremberg. In recent years, developers have slowly begun converting sections into luxury apartments and a youth hostel, meaning a resort literally designed by Hitler's government may finally, 8 decades late, start hosting actual vacationers. The scale of the original design is hard to overstate. Had all 8 planned buildings actually been finished, Prora would have stretched nearly 4.5 miles along the coastline, with every one of its rooms deliberately positioned to face the sea, while all the hallways, bathrooms, and communal facilities were pushed to the landward side of each block. Some declassified plans even suggest Hitler's government considered using the structure as a fallback military installation if the vacation scheme ever fell through, though in the end, it never served either purpose, sitting empty through the very war it was meant to help distract German workers from. Number 2. Bokor Hill Station, Cambodia. French colonists built Bokor Hill Station in the early 1920s, high in the Elephant Mountains of southern Cambodia, specifically as an escape from the brutal heat and humidity of Phnom Penh. Construction took roughly 9 months and reportedly killed 900 laborers in the process, but the result, centered on the Grand Bokor Palace Hotel and Casino, quickly became one of the most luxurious retreats anywhere in France's Southeast Asian colonies, complete with a post office, a Catholic church, and royal apartments. The resort's history from there reads like a cycle that simply refuses to break. The French abandoned Beaucourt during an anti-colonial uprising in the late 1940s, only for it to reopen under King Norodom Sihanouk in 1962 as the Cité du Beaucourt, complete with a new casino and 2 additional hotels. That revival lasted less than a decade before the Khmer Rouge seized the area in the 1970s, using the misty, mountaintop buildings as a military stronghold, reportedly holding onto the site as one of their last strongholds well into the early 1990s. Today, the original French buildings still stand, weathered and fog-draped, alongside a very different addition, a modern, billion-dollar casino resort built by a company that leased the mountain for 99 years, starting in 2008. It's a strange split screen of a place, crumbling colonial ruins sitting a short walk from brand new gaming floors, with locals still swearing the mist that regularly rolls through carries the ghosts of the colonial officers, brides, and soldiers who all passed through Beaucourt at one point or another. The old Beaucourt Palace Hotel and Casino has itself gone through its own cycle of renovation, having been partially restored as part of the new development, while the abandoned Old Catholic Church and the Black Palace, a modest retreat once used by King Sihanouk himself, remain largely untouched relics from the resort's earlier lives. Getting there today requires nothing more than a smooth paved road built by the new leaseholders, a stark contrast to the original French road that reportedly cost hundreds of lives to carve out of the mountainside a century earlier. Number 1. Varosha, Famagusta, Cyprus. No list like this one ends anywhere else. Through the late 1960s and early 1970s, Varosha, a coastal district of Famagusta on Cyprus's eastern shore, was arguably the single most glamorous resort in the entire Mediterranean, nicknamed the French Riviera of Cyprus. Its high-rise hotels, over 10,000 beds in total, hosted celebrities including Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and Brigitte Bardot, and the district pulled in roughly 700,000 visitors a year, an astonishing number for a stretch of coastline that small. Then, on the morning of August 14, 1974, air raid sirens went off as Turkish forces launched the second phase of their invasion of Cyprus, advancing directly into Famagusta. Varosha's roughly 39,000 residents fled in a matter of hours, most believing they'd be back within days. Eggs were left boiling on stovetops, clothes stayed hanging in closets, and wedding gifts sat unopened on tables, since almost nobody who left ever imagined they were leaving for good. Varosha remained completely sealed off by the Turkish military for the next 46 years, an entire resort city slowly swallowed by trees growing through hotel lobbies and rust-consuming abandoned cars parked exactly where their owners left them. In 2020, Turkish Cypriot authorities reopened part of the coastal strip to visitors, letting people walk streets that had been frozen in time since the Nixon administration, though not a single original resident has ever been allowed to move back in. As one journalist who studies the divide once put it, Varosha is open for tourism now, but it's not open for return, which might be the single strangest sentence you could write about a place that used to be the most desirable address in the Mediterranean. At its peak, Varosha's hotel bed capacity reportedly rivaled that of Turkey as an entire country, a genuinely staggering statistic for one small coastal district. The Argo Hotel became Elizabeth Taylor's preferred retreat during her visits, while the King George and Asterius hotels reportedly competed openly to host whichever famous face happened to be in town that week. That reopening in 2020 sparked immediate backlash from Greek Cypriots and drew criticism from the United Nations and European Union, since returning Varosha to its original residence has long been treated as one of the central bargaining chips in any eventual reunification of the island, a deal that, more than 50 years after the invasion, still hasn't been struck. 15 places, emptied by war, hurricanes, landslides, bankruptcy, and one truly disastrous cocaine smuggling scheme, and every single one of them proves the same uncomfortable point. Nowhere stays the destination forever. From a Nazi resort that never hosted a single vacationer to a Mediterranean paradise still waiting for its residents to come home, The gap between world-famous getaway and overgrown ruin turns out to be a lot thinner than any brochure would ever admit. If you enjoyed this one, hit like, subscribe for more of these, and let me know in the comments which of these you wish you could have visited in its prime. See you in the next video.